council member, audible autos, forwards, forwards, forwards. He was an icon then. My good friend Lisa Davis asked me if I would assist her in finding the master of ceremonies for our 50th reunion at Murrah High School. There was no question in my mind who it was going to be. So I picked up the phone, I called out the station, I got Bert, told him I had something important to discuss with him. He thought I had a news story. And I went down and I asked Bert, I said, would you be our master of ceremonies for that particular evening? And he just jumped at the opportunity because this was his class and he knew all of us. And so we all wound up out at the Ag Center. And it wasn't just Murrah, it was a lot of other schools that joined in too. We had an overflow crowd. And we all spiffed ourselves up, to look the best we could at that age. And Bert showed up in a pair of shorts and a Hawaiian shirt. But I can tell you this, he kept us on schedule, which I'm probably not, and he kept us rocking and rolling through that whole evening, and it was just a great triumph for all of our classes. And now I want to close by speaking for my Murrah class of 1957. Bert was more than an icon, more than a newsman who battled hurricanes, dogs, and governors. Bert was more than the thousands of stories told about him over all these years. He was one of us in a glorious time. He was our classmate and our friend, and we would miss him.
Thank you, Bill. Bobby.
We are all Bert Case fans, but we are not alone in our adoration of Bert. That became apparent when we were in the newsroom one day and Jack Hobbs announced, "There's a guy outside on the grass burning candles and incense and says he's here to worship Bert." Bert was a stickler for correct pronunciation. He taught myself, as well as many of you in here, that it's not G-I-T, it is G-E-T. But what was so funny was the day that he was reading a news story on the teleprompter, obviously of a word that he had not seen before, and he pronounced the very famous rapper as Tupac Shakur. The director, Robert Littleton, our producer, there were howls everywhere in the studio. And just to hear him say and read it on the teleprompter, the other famous rapper, Snoop Doggy Dogg, was always fun. At one point, Bert's office was next to mine, along with Marcia and Maggie's, and from time to time I could hear some private conversations that he would have. And I remember when personal cell phones became more prevalent, and his began to ring. He was obviously fumbling, trying to find the answer button, and I heard him say, "There goes my electronic leash." And then he said, "Hello, Mary." Oh. Bert relished in covering severe weather. If he knew there was the possibility of bad weather, he would come to the weather lab or the studio, he would find me, he would ask really intelligent questions, wanting to know what the thinking and the timing was behind the weather. Covering severe weather for Bert meant that he would get a legitimate news story instead of being sent out on some mind-numbing news conference. Because if he didn't want to cover a story, he would make his disdain known, and he would say, "This is a newspaper story. This is Bush League." But when Bert saw you not feeling well, he had great sympathy for you, whether you were battling the common cold or he just thought you were working too hard. Even for me, it was pregnancy. So I remember that time when I went into labor just before the 5 p.m. newscast, and I was 9 months pregnant, and it was pretty obvious I was in pain, so I began to walk or waddle down the hallway, and Bert said, "Barbie, are you ready for the newscast?" And I said, "Bert, my water has just broken, and I'm going to drive myself to the emergency room." And he said, "You mean you're not going to stay and at least do the weather?" And as you know, being in television, you get your share of mean emails, mean letters. And I remember receiving one that had really hurt my feelings quite badly. And Bert told me, he said, "Barbie, it doesn't matter what they say about you, just as long as they're talking about you and they spell your name right." But make no doubt about it, Bert had many girlfriends. Now, we knew that Mary was the one that he went home to every night, but Bert was a ladies' man, and he was a smooth operator. He never met a woman he did not like. Every day when he would come into the newsroom, I'd greet him with, "Hey, Bert, what do you know?" And he would say, "I know you, darling, and that's all I need to know." But if he saw a pretty girl on a commercial, he would say, "Should make a bulldog yank his chain." I remember for the last several Valentine's Days that we've had, speaking of girlfriends, Bert had some tradition that he started with myself and Maggie and Stephanie Bell Flint, where he would give us chocolate candied hearts at the end of the 5 o'clock newscast and present them to us there on the air. And of course, we would give him kisses on his cheek, and he would leave with red lipstick all over. He loved it. And we thought it was his idea, and we were so impressed that Bert was thinking of us on Valentine's Day, until that day that I overheard him call Mary on his electronic leash, and he said, "Mary, did you go to the drugstore and get the Valentine candy?" So, Mary, we thank you for supporting Bert's chocolate gifts to us over the years. Bert was known to sing some of his favorite songs. And we would do a little duo sing-off sometimes during the commercial breaks or just before the news would start. He would sing a little bit of Johnny Cash. I would sing a little bit of Stonewall Jackson. And you should hear him sing at a great voice. If he was passionate about something, you knew it. And he didn't hold back his thoughts and his opinions. But regardless of what you thought about the stories he covered and how he covered them, Bert was respected. Viewers loved Bert not for what Bert did, but who Bert was. Today, he is in the land that is fairer than day, where there is an abundance of Smith County watermelons and tomatoes sliced between 2 pieces of white bread. He's with the maker of heaven and earth, where the sun, S-O-N, is always shining. And you can't lose somebody when you know where they are. Bert taught me many things, but above all, he taught me and you that it's not what you do that matters, but why you do it matters so much more.
Thank you, Barbara. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody he is traveling wrong, and my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring back beauty in a world of wrath, if I can spread love's message as the Master taught, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain.
Maggie Wade is a great perspective. I remember Maggie and Bert being my evening news team some 30 years ago as I ate my evening sandwich.
Thank you, Father. Wow. It's amazing to think that I worked at WLBT long enough that Bert Case and I got to trade stories as grandparents. He was so proud of his granddaughter and talked about how smart she was, and so proud of his daughters and Mary. He was so proud of the work that he did with Jim Duncan, and I can hear him with the producers now. This is not a vo sot vo. This story cannot be reduced to 45 seconds. He fought for what he believed in. I can hear him calling Marsha's name, hello, Marsha Ann. And Mike Evans and Jerome and David. And I see Don back there and Charlie. He called us all by our names, and I was Magnolia because that's my real name, and Bert always used it. And his name, there was so much power, so much grace, so much strength in his name, Bert Case. And I remember someone called him and said, why do you always do your stories and close them with Bird Case? And he said, let me explain to you all why. And Barbie and I were on the 5 o'clock news set. He said, a lady one time came up to me and said that every time I said Bert Case, it sounded like I was saying bird cage. And he said, from that point on, I made up my mind that no one would mistake my name for bird cage. So he enunciated every single word. There's a great quote that says, when someone you love becomes a memory, the memory becomes a treasure. And the Bible tells us to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. I have to tell you that I'll treasure every memory I have of Bert. From the time I was pregnant, Barbie, with my son, who is now 24, and he would kick and my blouse would pop up, and Bert said, what in the world is going on, Maggie? And then he'd say, I don't know nothing about birthing no babies. And I said, I promise, Bert, I won't do that to you. One of my favorite memories is of Skycopter and the traffic reports with Mary aboard Skycopter, and everyone in the studio would have to get quiet, and he would watch that screen. His intention, I'm telling you, his attention was just, he was locked onto it. And everyone had to be quiet. He watched the lighting. He wanted to make sure that we could see her face. And he would look at it and he said, Mary did a great job with that. And he'd break into a great smile. And one day I looked at Barbie and I said, I hope my husband loves me that much. He loved the news business. And he cheered good storytelling and writing and video. Bert was the first person to tell you when you got it right. He was also the first person to tell you when you got it wrong. And then he would always tell you what you could do to be better. He was always a teacher. I remember one day the teleprompter went out just before the 5 o'clock newscast, and they told us that they probably wouldn't be able to get it back up for us to be able to read from the newscast. And Bert took my hand and he looked at him. He said, "All I need is a microphone. I can ad-lib the whole newscast if I need to." And that's just about what he did. I never had to worry when he was there with me. He always had my back. He always told me that I was burning the candle at both ends and that I needed to slow down. And that was the last conversation that I had with him, is, "Magnolia, you're burning the candle at both ends, darling, and you need to slow down." One of the things that I'll remember most about him is that he kept up with everyone in the newsroom. He knew about our children. He knew about birthdays. And if you didn't know a name, he would ask you because he wanted to call everyone in the studio by their name. And he never forgot. That's the kind of man he was. We all loved him. We all have wonderful, wonderful memories. When someone you love becomes a memory, the memory becomes a treasure. Bert, you are truly one of the greatest treasures for all of us.
Thank you, Maggie. Now I guess his boss, would that be boss? Yeah.
That's basically how I felt when Mary offered me the opportunity to talk about Bert. And I knew I was going to be up here with the likes of these women and people who have been touched by Bert. And just in this room today, you can look around you and see what kind of a person he is and how important he was to the state of Mississippi. I also worried very much, Mary, about me and the 2-minute rule that you gave me, considering the way that Bert and I think about between me and Bert, keeping anything into 2 minutes was quite a problem. So I brought it and I wrote it down so I keep it somewhat short. I spent all weekend trying to decide what to say about my friend Bert, but ultimately it became clear that nothing I say will be enough. The man is the TV news business in Mississippi. One of my favorite days working at 16 WAPT was when I walked in the door with Bert to tell our news team that he was going to be on our team. And some of you guys can remember that. You guys can see all of those people there. I don't know how we're covering the news today because everybody's here. But you think it was Beyonce or something when he walked in the door. It was a frenzy. And one of our anchors, Keegan, summed it up nicely. And Keegan, you knew where I was going with this one. And Bert has repeated this to many people. Keegan walked up to Bert and told him, "It feels like Christmas morning." And it really did. Everybody was unwrapping a gift. He spent a lot of time at WLBT, but when he came to WAPT, it was something to behold. You could see his impact on us, on me, on every one of our reporters as soon as he walked in the door. And just like they talked about, he knew everybody's name. And he took time to figure out the people who he didn't know, and then he took time to help them to grow to be the best journalists that they can be. I know somebody here was sick this morning and didn't want to miss this because that's the kind of impact that he had on them. So the challenge for me was, how can I tell this guy what to do? When we sat down for the first time ever, he told me, I'm going to try my Bert. "Ben, you're doing some good work over here. Did you know I was the news director when they opened the doors at 16 WAPT? So you can imagine a little bit of an intimidation factor there. I think he was trying to measure me up, but I found out he really wasn't trying to measure me up. He was trying to extend everything he knew to me. He was trying to let me learn from him, and he absolutely did. But here's some of the things I tried to do. I asked him to come in at 9:30, and of course, Bert showed up at 8:30. I asked him for story ideas. He gave me visionary thoughts. That's why we came up with the series, The Case Files. Whatever Bert has on his mind, we're going to let him do that story. Bert's first story for us was about the dilapidated old store in Money, Mississippi, where Emmett Till met that white woman. and it was falling apart. And he wanted to talk about saving history.